All right, folks, just in the interest of time, we would love to get started. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Melinda Smith, and I am the Director of Partnerships for Freedom Network USA. We thank you all for taking the time today to learn a little bit more about what it takes to break out as a consultant, as a survivor leader. I want to take a few minutes and do a special thanks to the Human Trafficking Legal Center and the Survivor Alliance, both of which are co-sponsors for this presentation. Just to remind everyone, this is a two-part webinar series. This is the first part happening today, and our second presentation will take place on November 13th at the same time, same place. So if you have not registered for that second webinar, we encourage you to do so. We will send out the details along with a quick evaluation for you to complete at the conclusion of today's presentation. Now, I just want to quickly take a moment to introduce our moderator. Today, the founder and president of the Human Trafficking Legal Center will be joining us as our moderator, Martina Vandenberg. She will be taking us through the presentation and helping us navigate some of the important questions that we hope that you will be bringing to our panelists. With that, Martina, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Thank you, Melinda, and thank you to the Freedom Network USA for organizing this and doing all of the work to make it happen. So we are fortunate today because we have two of the most remarkable leaders in the survivor movement, not just in the United States, but actually in the world. We have Minh Dang, who is currently a PhD student at the University of Nottingham. She's the executive director of the Survivor Alliance, and she told me to tell you that she likes teal. But Minh is just coming off a conference in England, bringing survivors together from around the world. So congratulations, Minh, on that event. And we're happy to have you here today as well. And the second speaker is Finus Lapenga, and Finus has become a remarkable survivor advocate in the movement here in the United States. She's a board member of the Survivor Alliance, and so Minh and Finus have worked together before and worked together to put this entire presentation together, for which we're grateful. And also Finus is a consultant for the Human Trafficking Legal Center and has trained lawyers and prosecutors in the United States on human trafficking with a particular focus on forced labor. Just to give you a little bit of structure for this particular webinar, the panelists have a PowerPoint, but they're going to pause at the end of each of the slides to ask if there are questions. So if you have questions, please feel free to bring them up right away so we can discuss those issues. And then we have about an hour and 15 minutes. So with that, I am handing it over to Minh and Finus. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. Do you want to say a quick note, Martina or Melinda, about how people submit questions?
Right, thank you. So in order to submit questions, you have two options. You can add something to the chat box, in which case Melinda will read it, or you can submit something directly to the Q&A box, and then we'll read those questions out as well. So either option works, and thank you for reminding me of that, Minh. Go ahead.
No problem. Okay, so thanks everybody for joining. It's a little bit weird that we can't see you, but hopefully you can see us. We have 7 slides for you, just 7, but a lot of information, and we'll make sure to send out additional information to you after if you're interested. But really the point of this is a quick guide to becoming a consultant. So this is geared towards people who maybe just started consulting or haven't yet consulted before, and you want to know some of the nuts and bolts. So when I talk about nuts and bolts, I think about things that keep tables and buildings together, right? So what are the key pieces that will keep your consulting practice together? So we'll go ahead and move on to the first slide, and I'll turn it over to Finus.
Thank you all for coming to the webinar. So the first slide, I'm going to give you an example. Determine your areas. You can see it too. I think you can see the screen, right? The topic. So I'm gonna just give you an example of my experience. I was asked to speak in public in 2013 for one anti-trafficking organization where although I was still hearing, I was not ready to share my story. It was made my trauma even worse that time after the presentation. The organization asked me about, the organization never asked me about my mental involved afterwards, which I have to deal with that on my own. So this is common, or not, this is one of the examples, but I heard this over and over from other survivors in a National Survivor Network. The same experience, they asked with organization to speak, not on their own will. So if you are not ready, there's some consequence for that. That's what happened to me, because I didn't think I was ready to do that. Although I was like, oh, I'm gonna speak, but after that, I have to deal with the consequences. I hope I have someone to talk to after I spoke to, but it wasn't the case. So it was so challenging for me. Survivors need to be willing to share themselves rather than someone to tell them to share their story. I think that time, if I was given a choice, if I was able to think twice, okay, I think I'm ready. It won't turn out the way it turned out, but I became such severe. After I ended up I was in the hospital. I attempted suicide actually. So it's like that. So have to be careful. And another example in when you talk about our stories, when you ask to share our story, to speak with organization, they have to tell us up to the front whether they want us to share our story, because survivors not only they can share, we can only share our story. We have experienced other experts. We can educate them. For example, when I speak, it's not I only share my story. Sometimes I educate lawyers, as you hear about the introduction, my bio. I provide recommendation how to work better with the victims. The same thing, healthcare. So it's not only when you were asked to speak, we have to share what happened to me to bring up our trauma all the time. We have also other, other knowledge that we can able to, bring the change. Seek changes. For me, I'm a labor trafficking survivor. Anti-trafficking movement, most of the time, some of you can agree with me, labor trafficking is overlooked. So for me, having the opportunity to speak up to raise awareness, I point out that that we have to also address labor trafficking, because labor trafficking is happening in our neighborhood. So.
Thanks, Finesse. So welcome to those who've just joined us. We will go through each slide and you can submit your questions on the chat. But just to highlight what Finance is saying, we as survivor leaders, there have been survivors in the movement for a long time. And if you want to go back to even Frederick Douglass, right, we have expertise that is outside of our story. And so we want to avoid what survivors are now saying they don't want to do, which is to just be known for their trauma story. So if we go around talking about our stories, we are basically feeding into what survivors are saying is wrong with the movement. So the first thing that you need to do, we suggest, is to determine your area of expertise separate from your story. So use your story maybe as some inspiration. For example, do you have a lot to say about the mental health care that you were provided and how it was great or not so great? So that comes from your story, but instead of sharing your whole path through it, you're focusing on the elements about mental health care that you want to change. Or you could talk about the NRM process for the UK or the T visa. Maybe you're really interested about media. So think about sort of what from your story that you want to change and see differently, or that you might be unique to you. So for example, maybe you're really interested in drama. So you could talk about ways to use drama in connecting with survivors, or what's the thing that you're most proud of your journey, and say, well, I'm most proud of learning English, but I had to do that on my own and I had no support for it. So it would have been great if we worked with education systems. And so you focus on consulting with education systems, right? So determine your area of expertise is really about looking into the area that you want to make the most change into. So any questions on this panel or this slide? No? Okay, we'll go on. So developing your area of expertise. So now that you've decided on your area of expertise, we recommend that you develop it further. So as a consultant, you are presenting yourself as a professional and an expert in this area. So what that means is you're going to need to know more than just your own personal experience about that topic. So I'll share about mental health because that's my own personal topic and area of expertise. So I did a lot of reading. I got suggestions from other people about the types of things we should read. I went to conferences focused on the topic. I started writing my own reflections, having other people look at it. I read other survivors' books or other survivor presentations. I looked at the policies that were related to it. So are there mental health policies in the United States that are relevant to survivors? I also reached out to other survivors to ask them what are their interests in this area. So as you develop your expertise, you might start realizing that you're going to need to know even more, right? So even if my area of expertise is around mental health, I also need to know, oh, wait, who's allowed to provide mental health services? Okay, they have to have this type of certification. What does that certification mean in this state versus that state or this country? Are there ways that survivors can report that something went wrong in their mental health setting? So as you dig deeper in your answer, you're looking into all these different elements. It leads you to learn more about that particular field or industry so that you can be ready essentially to answer questions from people who are going to want to know more than just your own experience in that area. Finance, do you have any suggestions of how else you may have gotten your areas of expertise deepened or learned more about the area of human trafficking?
For my expert, like, can you repeat again? Sorry.
Yeah, just any other examples you have to share about learning more about your area of expertise.
Well, for me, like, for example, if I go back, like for pesticide, I just share that when you were asked to speak, it's not only about sharing a story. So I know that I'm involved with like a policy. So like, for example, last year I spoke about this human trafficking task force where I asked like prosecutors to identify and prosecute labor trafficking. And also I ask people, I ask them not just like listening, but they have to take action. So that time, like, then like recently I was speaking this year at the victim rights award, and I was also awarded my own award. So that time actually, this year Attorney General came to me and said, okay, finance, we told you that we are listening. That's why we are taking action. That's why we are creating human trafficking labor subcommittee. So, so they take action. So when we said we are not only like expert on sharing our story, but we are also expert in other venues. We can change the laws. Yeah,
right.
So one of the example.
So attending task force meetings, there's often public meetings around these issues that you can attend.
Yes.
And if you're looking for things to read or places or conferences to go to, you can ask us and pretty much reach out to any survivor leader you're connected with as a starting point. Questions?
Min, hi, this is Melinda. I actually have a question and would love to hear your suggestions. So one of the examples that you gave is attending conference on a specific conferences and other trainings.
Yeah.
Are there any recommendations that you have for our attendees on where they can maybe find some support to attend those? I know a lot of times trainings can be very expensive and maybe out of the reach financially for folks to attend. So are there any resources that you can share that might make that a little bit more tangible?
That's a great question. So certainly some conferences have some survivor scholarships. So shout out to the Freedom Network USA for providing some of those. And then I've actually had some success just reaching out directly to conference organizers and saying, look, I'm a survivor leader. And if you don't want to share that you're a survivor leader, you can find other ways to say, you know, I'm a student or I'm a new professional, and oftentimes people understand and see if they have discounted rates. Sometimes there are scholarships. For example, Sungate is run by a survivor leader, and they have scholarships for education in general. So education might be school, but I think sometimes they include sort of educational events. Specific conferences, Freedom Network USA, they didn't pay me to say that, by the way. And I think there's, it kind of depends on the particular area, like mental health. Sometimes going to general conferences, we have developed a list of conferences about human trafficking that we're happy to send to people and follow up on. There's like an Ohio anti-trafficking conference. There's a Yale anti-trafficking conference. The Cyber Alliance is trying to host its own conference. And actually, Martina, we didn't have the conference with everyone from around the world yet, but we had the UK survivors meet. So next April, we're trying to bring survivors together. Shared Hope has a conference. So for better or for worse, you could probably Google anti-slavery conference and you'll find lots. But one way is to actually present. So this is one, sometimes conference presenters get discounts to conferences. So if you want help developing your presentation and apply to present, then that could be a way that you then can have access to the rest of the conference. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you, Min.
Can I add that that's something on that it means for the conference attending conferences. There's sometime when there are conferences, they organize a limit for people who are attending, like, I mean, just choose like sort of like, let's say, sex trafficking, or without including labor trafficking, or labor trafficking including sex trafficking. So that's an issue. So if you are waiting, like, for example, to attend like the conference, even when you apply, you are not going to be qualified because you are not, it doesn't fit with the top, I mean, the people, the audience they are looking for. So it's like that.
So this is Martina. Can I just ask one question? Have either you, Min, or Finance, have you worked with OVC? Because OVC does do conferences and work with survivors. Have either one of you done an OVC conference?
I did like on webinar, though, not like go in their conference, but webinar, yeah.
Yeah.
So I personally haven't been to their particular conference, but I think often in January they do one and they invite survivor leaders to it. And they also have a survivor leader fellowship training program. And I think they just finished their last cohort, but that's something that we can definitely share. And by becoming a part of OVC TTAC, you can also have access to other consulting opportunities for those in the US. Can we also just get send us a chat if there's anybody not in the US that will help us make sure that we can answer your questions or not be too US focused. But yes, so OVC TTAC. Also, I would say some conferences will video their sessions, and so looking into their archives and seeing if you could watch some of the sessions after.
Okay, so we have a few questions.
Martina, just because we have a small group, I'm actually just going to unmute folks and you can ask your question directly.
Okay,
Okay, so
sounds-
Eric, it looked like you had a question here, so I'm just going to unmute you and you can ask your question. Eric?
Hi, can you
Hi,
hear me?
Eric.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation today. And I'm wondering, what can I do as an LGBTQ2+I survivor who, presents as a man? It seems like just existing in a way is a segment of expertise. And in some ways, don't necessarily want to distract from that early stage of a movement.
Yeah, Eric, thank you for that. And I think you're right that it's probably a blessing and a curse that just existing is an element of expertise. And so I would say you have the benefit of not much going on in that area. I do know some, I think, not male identified, but female identified or trans folks who are doing work in this space, but even they are alone. And so if you wanted to pursue that area, it would be much, I think, welcome in the movement. And I think one thing would just need to be concerned about is how much you want to include your personal experience in that, because it can be difficult and people can ask you more, they start learning about not being home, like addressing their homophobia needs at you instead of, so I think just being careful about your own protection and safety when you become, we don't want you to become too tokenized or alone. So figuring out that balance for you, or maybe partnering with other people who are interested in talking about gender rights more broadly speaking. So in terms of what you can do, really, I think any element of sharing what types of services you needed or what you're seeing is missing would be fantastic.
Great. I do see one other question here in the box about specifically asking about conferences. I think it would be beneficial to attendees if we could put together just a quick list
Yes.
to send out after the presentation, so folks kind of have a place to start when they're looking for those training opportunities.
Absolutely.
Great.
Should I move on to the next slide?
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, Min.
Okay, finance.
Yeah, decide on your fee and the honorarium structure. This is the hard part, also the best, because it's money, right? So most of organizations, when they contacted the consultant, actually they want you to pay up the front. But like it's a challenge for us because we live with paycheck through paycheck. So we don't have money to pay for flights and expenses. So organization pay, we wish organization can pay travel up the front on time, pay a dime, food, taxes. So that way we don't have to worry. Because like we cannot, we have to pay our bills and we have to worry about the travel. If we don't have to, those kind of assess, then we cannot proceed. Taxes, we think taxes should be paid.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? So we're gonna have a whole seminar on taxes, and consultants are independent consultants generally, so the independent consultant has to pay taxes directly. So just to clarify that, but there'll be a whole seminar on taxation that we can talk about then.
So if they contacted us, we're gonna start telling them that we can't be able to pay, then you can come. If they can pay up the front, we cannot come to present because we have no money. So we are not gonna move forward. Survivors do not have to pay, provide their own expenses for free. This is an issue in the anti-trafficking movement. Most of the time, I had my own experience, provide my expertise on anti-trafficking organization and not able to compensate me. And also I hear all this kind of story over and over in anti-trafficking movement in NSN members having the same issue, asked to speak, but not able to pay them, even in transportation, even in food, but they have to travel to get where they wanna present. They have to consider, we are people, we have bills to pay too. and we have to take off our jobs, take off. So we need to be compensated. If you want us to speak, we need to be paid. We're experts, so nothing for free. And you know you cannot do this job without us. Nothing about us without us.
That's a great motto, Finesse. So as Finesse mentioned, this slide is to tell you that the basic assumption is that you should get paid. So then it gets to deciding on your fee and your honorarium. So the different terms are really important because honorariums you can often think of as what guest speakers get. Fees are often related to consulting, so you are providing a service. So that might be an hourly fee, like you might say, well, I'll do $25 an hour for this type of work. Or maybe you would set a fee of, okay, it's $1,000 for this whole day or something. So it's important to set your fee and then decide as well on what you're willing to negotiate. So for example, here's some things to think about when you're negotiating your fee. How early or experienced are you in your process, right? So obviously, when I first started this work, I didn't charge as much as I might now. So you want to think about your levels of experience and expertise. You want to think about the audience. I'm, for example, willing to charge less to NGOs or churches or high schools, for example, than I might charge the government or businesses. So consider what is available from the person who you might be consulting with. As Finesse mentioned, travel and preparation time. So I usually charge travel time personally at half of the amount that I do for actually doing the work. So let's say I'm charging $50 an hour for developing curriculum, I'll charge $25 an hour for the travel, meaning because I'm sitting on an airplane, for example. So it depends on what you feel comfortable with. Also, don't forget to add administration time. So that's like emailing back and forth, signing contracts, looking at marketing materials. There's all these other small little tasks that are involved in your consulting work. Think about standard rates. So I think that there's a standard US government rate for certain projects. And so you want to find out what is normal for the organization that you are looking to work for. And I also just wanted to share a few things, sort of phrases that you can use to help push back on people saying, well, I'm going to do it for free. So one statement is, this isn't my full-time job, so I might have to take vacation time to do this work for you. I need extra time to care for myself before and after this event. So I need additional money for that. You can also talk about how other professionals are paid for their speaking time and their expertise, that this is a common practice. This isn't a new thing that we're asking people in terms of paying for our time. And this is also why it's important for you to develop an area of expertise, because there's a concern if you're asking to be paid to tell your story, that can make it look like literally they're paying you to say these things instead of you're choosing to say it. So that's also why newspapers can't pay you to talk to them, because they definitely can't look like they're paying you for what you say. Some government agencies also have difficulties paying people. That's complicated, but always push to say it is common practice for people to be paid for their expertise. Questions?
Yeah, Min, we do have a question. Someone has asked, are there any suggestions on supporting a survivor in the upfront costs that will usually be paid at the back end? Travel, meals, incidentals. It's very hard for survivors to put the money up front and then to wait for payment. how do we support survivors on the front end when they are waiting for reimbursement? So Finance, I think you dealt with that.
I can put my thoughts. I can put my thoughts in. Then I'm mainly gonna weigh in. So this is a good question. I think it can be like it will be helpful, like if the organization, whoever want to ask you to speak, survivor to speak, if they can send some of the, money, like half of the money to, a consultant, and that consultant will deposit the money and will use it, so can able to travel and pay expenses. Then the rest of the money, then they can, send you the money later. That can, reduce the stress between both sides. So send the money half of the front to the consultant, and I'll deposit the money, and I'll pay whatever the ticket and and get where I gotta go and get the work done. Then when I'm done, then you send me the rest of the money. What do you think, me?
I think that's a great idea. I personally haven't seen great solutions to this, except for seeing if the organization can pay the flight and lodging, for example, in advance, and then they don't give you your food and honorarium until later. So that's a similar model to only giving you part of the funds. But I have really the creative solutions that I have seen survivors do is, and this is not, what do I say? Since I'm not a lawyer, I also won't say this, but this is not advice that you should then say that Min told you this and then get mad at me. But just sharing with you what other survivors have done is get a 0% APR credit card. So what that means is that they don't charge you interest for a year. So that means if you get reimbursed within even 2 or 3 months, then you pay it back, then you're just paying back the exact amount. Again, you have to worry about all the issues of getting a credit card. So I just want to warn you about that. Other people have asked for loans from family and friends because they know that you'll get that paid back, but maybe family and friends can do that up front. I actually am curious if you have any other ideas, Martina.
So, Min, I'm actually curious to ask you, do you get refusals from organizations when you ask them to pay for the tickets up front? Because as someone who runs an organization, it's best practice always to pay up front for all of the expenses so that no one has to front that money. I'm surprised that that's not the norm.
I have gotten some refusals, yes, but it's become more rare. Yeah, it's become more rare. But I also, early in my days of doing this, I was ashamed to ask, quite frankly. So I just put it on a credit card. And now I've stopped doing that. But yeah, I think if you just feel empowered to say, you know what, if you want me to come, I can't front the money, then work it out with them.
So Min, my only suggestion would be some government agencies are not allowed to pay up front. There are government organizations, when you're invited, that can't pay in advance. They have to reimburse because of the way that the state financial systems work. So I think what's worked for Finus is asking another organization to pay for the expenses and then have the government reimburse the organization. But that's really contingent on having a relationship with an organization so that the organization can front the expenses and hold that open while the government gets around to paying it back. So that's the only other suggestion I would raise. Okay, how we go? Go ahead, sorry.
This is Melinda. I also just wanted to echo, Martina, your point. So I have coordinated several dozen survivor participants at our conference over the years, and we have done both of the examples that have been given. We have sent reimbursements even for things like food ahead of time if folks didn't have access to cash to pay for those expenses. But also, to Martina's point, we also are happy to pay for things like, I mean, hotel rooms are incredibly expensive. So we will work with, let's say OVCT Tech is funding the consultant. We will work directly with the hotel and pay for those costs up front for all of the consultants, and then be reimbursed by OVCT Tech on the back end. So I think really the point is to ask. To your point, Min, you know, asking if there's any additional accommodations that can be made, and knowing that they may, you know, the organization may say no, but many times there are allies in the field that you would be surprised can do something to make that happen.
Thanks. I think in the interest of time, we should try and move to the next slide. So develop a list of non-negotiable requirements for each consulting job. So Finesse, you talked about this a little bit, but share more.
Yeah, how to negotiate the parameters of speaking. So we have to know if whether we'll be telling our story again or we'll be providing expert to the organization. We have to know that ahead of time so that we can be aware. And also, like, for example, in other cases, if you are doing interviews like medias, we need to know, I mean, how long, it doesn't matter how long, first of all, it doesn't matter organization or media, we need to know ahead of time, how long is the interview, how long are we gonna speak? And also, if it's like media, we have to know, I mean, how are they gonna use our story? How our story will be used. We have to know that ahead of time so we can make a decision and you can plan. Because
that's great.
Efforts to do that.
Yeah, and I can share with anybody who wants something that I've sent out, and basically asks, you know, is media going to be there? Sharing the title that you want to be known by, a bio, making sure any posters are checked by you. You can say, you know, on your contract, you could say nothing shall be posted on public or social media unless I review it. Talk about photographs, as Finesse said, how long you're willing to speak for. For example, I now no longer travel if I'm speaking for less than 30 minutes, because what's the point of me flying 6 hours to talk for 30 minutes sometimes, unless it's like a very important conference. So deciding if you never want to speak in a church, or you never want to speak in a room of only cisgender females, you know, or you will only do stuff for over a certain amount of dollars for your speaking engagement. So literally thinking about all of your non-negotiables. And what that means is, these are the things I must have in order to do the speaking engagement. Now you got to be reasonable, right? You can't say I must have a Snickers bar waiting for me in my hotel room. But things like, I need a private room to prepare. I want the panel moderated. I don't want to speak to media. What else do I have? Usually, I want someone to meet me at the airport, or I don't want to have a dinner with every presenter. So really thinking about, if they aren't going to provide you these things, you can say no.
And also I wanted to add for the media, and that is very important, because most of the time, like most of the survivors, like they have an issue, I mean, good outcome and also bad outcome with the medias. So it's good to ask questions. I mean, when you are doing this interview with the media, to ask them like, wait, can I see the, I mean, final before you publish, if it's possible. If it's not possible, but if you can try, because sometimes they get them wrong. So it's not always, I mean, a good outcome. Yeah.
And Min, can I just ask you a question about this sort of list of non-negotiables?
Sure.
You put these in writing. Is this something that you submit in writing when you get an invitation?
I do. And even with media, I meant to say I have a do not ask list. So literally questions that I will not answer, especially because media, you don't always know what they're going to ask you. And so I do write down, these are non-negotiables, or I have it written down just for me, and then I go off the checklist and say, right, this isn't meeting my interests or needs. It's also a way for me to balance my schedule, because I will say that once you start coming out as a survivor leader, there's a high interest in survivor leaders. So you can be overwhelmed with requests, and a way for you to make sure that you're managing your time is by saying, oh, this doesn't meet my list of non-negotiables. So, okay, next slide. Over to you, Finesse.
Well, so being a consultant, it's not easy, because you have to know, to be aware, you have to interpret a contract, how to send an invoice, for example. You have to know all of those kind of things. How to build a website for consultant with information about services and charges, so that way you don't have to argue, like people can able to find your website, know the expectation. First of all, they're gonna know what kind of service can you offer them, and then they will decide. And also they will see, I mean, the charges, the ranges of the charges up the front ahead of time, can save time.
Finance, did you want, Min, did you want to add something?
Oh, sorry, I didn't know that you were through your list. Responding to email, you know, we all are busy and email is crazy, but as consultants, we need to do our best to respond. I had a recent incident where we weren't communicating and worried the person organizing. So we want to take responsibility for responding in a timely manner, saving receipts. So if you are saying that, okay, I'm okay with paying these costs up front, then you need to save the receipts so you can prove what you spent on it. Because don't forget, these are organizations who have to report to the government and other agencies as well. So we often work with NGOs or government, and you know, if I was to consult with Human Trafficking Legal Center, they are an NGO, and so they will have their books audited, and so that means that we want to make sure we're using public money that people donated. So we got to keep receipts of what we did. Also, timekeeping. So if you're told that you only have 30 minutes, really practice so that you're keeping to 30 minutes. Imagine being an organizer of an event and your speaker goes on and on and on, and it's difficult to interrupt you. It feels rude. So really practice and pay attention to signs. This also includes, as Finesse said, not to leave things all the way to the last minute if you can. These are best practices that you can carry into the business world, not just in being a consultant, right? Everything from learning how to draft an email and including only the relevant information, spell checking your documents, using PowerPoint, etc. Any questions on?
Actually, and also I just want to add one point. Also, and it's good. It's very helpful when you know the people you'll be on the panel with ahead of time. Introduction, not like just meet them while you are speaking. It's helpful so you can know, maybe have an opportunity of introduction, introduce you the people who's gonna be on the panel with you.
Mm-hmm.
And Min, and Finance, in your experience, do you do sort of pre-conference calls when you're on panels? Do you usually make time also to do a pre-conference call with the other panelists?
Yes, some of them, but not every. Some of them we have to send the email. Hey, can I like that? So, but mostly, yeah.
Yeah.
Some of them you have to brought up like, hey, is it possible this? Like be up the front. I mean, yeah.
And I think, Martina, you point to something that's a little bit broader, which is part of a business best practice is that you need to say what you need, right? So especially for survivor leaders, sometimes we're afraid to ask for exactly what we need or say we don't know something, but it's actually a best practice to say, you know what, I forgot my laptop and I really need someone to help me with that. It happens to all presenters, and don't forget that we're human. So even if it's, I spilled my coffee all over my notes, can someone quickly print this or something? We need to learn how to communicate with our allies about what will help us. And if we're not actually the right fit for an opportunity. So if you're contacted by an organization, it's a best practice to say, you know what, I would really like to do this, but if I'm not the best person, let me see if I can find someone else. Or I'm not the best person for all of this content, but I could speak on this content instead. Does that work for you? So sticking to your lane and not saying that you know how to talk about something that you don't know.
And Min or Finus, are you aware of any training programs? Like, best practices sound like, you know, they're easy and you're just born knowing them, but we all know. So are there any programs that you're aware of where survivors can get information on best practices?
Finance, I'll leave this to you if you'd like as well, but I'll just say, certainly best practices on like speaking. There's a lot of public speaking training on how to send an invoice. We can share with you a template and how best to track that. Definitely building a website. Survivor Alliance is going to host one. I am thinking a lot of this I've learned through other survivors or one-on-one mentoring. So there are some NGOs that provide some trainings on this in-house. It might be your local job center or libraries even sometimes provide these kinds of trainings. How about for you, Finance?
Well, I'm gonna get back to that later. We can move on to next slide.
Okay. Okay.
If I can add something.
Number 6, so invest time and resource into professional development. So this kind of builds off of some other stuff that we said. You know, learning how to use the technology that you need. There's kind of all kinds of examples, but all professionals are investing time outside of their work into improving skills that they need or want. So it could be reading things. Maybe you're reading the monthly anti-trafficking articles that come out from certain nonprofits, right? You're spending time really practicing your speaking. You're spending time writing emails, following up with other survivor leaders to ask for feedback on your presentation, following up with people that you meet on panels and saying, wow, I really liked how your presentation looked. Would you be willing to show me how you did that on PowerPoint? And so a lot of it is time as your resource, but sometimes it might be money. So saving up, for example, I saved up for a PowerPoint clicker so that when I go, I bring my own clicker so I know how to use it. Or seeing if you could get one donated. It might be things like saving up to invest in clothing that you are going to wear to look professional, investing the time to go to these conferences, to borrow books from the library and read more. All of these things professionals are doing on the side, no matter what industry you're in. Do you want to add anything, Finance?
No, we can go next slide.
Okay, final slide.
Consider risks and hazards of being a consultant. Yes, that's a good one. So when you make those money, when you get paid, right? For me, I mean, in the past, I had just like take the money and spend it as, you know, living paycheck through paycheck. Then it hits me because like when it's 16, I have to pay to IRS $900 because I wasn't aware that I have to report it. So it hits me. And I didn't stop until like HTC and asked me, hey, finance, are you saving, putting by the side like 30%, like putting this money? I said, what money? I was just using the check. So I was blinded. So I started doing differently now, paying quarterly, but it's hard because when you even through paycheck, like then calculating that money, like 30%, you have to take it. But it's good for us to do that because if you don't do that at the end, then it's on us. That 1099 form, it's not easy. It's a lot of money. They charge us more. I'm sure everyone can relate. So I learned in a hard way after I paid $900, 2016. So I'm doing it differently, which is not easy. But we have to consider that when we are doing consultant, we have to know that even if you can put like $10 by the side, can it be helpful at the end of the year to file our taxes? Or if you can pay like a quarterly 30%, if you can manage, that would be save us, to fall like what I did. Yeah.
Yeah, and what finance is talking about is basically avoiding tax fraud. So in the US and other places, you need to report your income. If you're working for any other business, like, and you're hired as an employee, they will take these taxes out for you. So when you're a consultant, you're working for yourself. And so there's often what's called a self-employment tax. And as Martina said, there'll be a whole separate tax webinar on the 13th of November. So they'll go more into that. But if you're paid by these organizations, that's why we're saying consider the tax that's going to be taken when you're setting your fee. So once you get it, immediately taking that money set aside to pay your taxes so that you don't commit tax fraud. Also, a hazard is if you are on public benefits, there are often income, limits. So being careful about what money you get and how that might affect your public benefits. I think it's different for each state. Something called liable, which is a concern. So if you start talking about your own experiences and you say something about your perpetrators, there's a potential for them to sue you about what you say. So you need to be very careful. If you talk about your own experience, for example, you're talking about it from what you know happened to you, but be mindful about the fact that this information is public and somebody can say, well, that's actually not true. And especially if you're going to litigate, which means to take your traffickers or perpetrators to court, anything that you say publicly can be scrutinized. So they might say, well, on December 2nd, 1982, you said this, but on October 7th, 1995, you said this. So you have to be careful about what you say and how you say it. Obviously, if you are consistent about your story, then that's not an issue, but this is another reason why to consider not having your story be your main area of expertise. The other piece is that you lose control of your story once it's out there, right? No matter what you say, somebody else can say something about it. So for example, someone has said that my story is false, or someone might say, well, I was there and that didn't happen. Or they can take your story and use it to fundraise for their organization. So just be mindful that that is a hazard of being a consultant that everybody has to deal with. And so this might be one that's too much for you, and you decide then that you don't want to be public about certain elements of your story. And then I will just note specifically about being a survivor leader, one of the risks is that you become pigeonholed as only a survivor. Now, obviously, if we want survivors' voices to be involved, then we need to say we're survivors. But it's also helpful to say, you know what, my title is an independent consultant, or you want to focus on being a student or a mom or some other thing. Make sure, it's a joke that I say that I like teal, and I often say other personal things just to humanize me, so that I'm not just a survivor, I'm not just a organizational leader, right? So be mindful of how your stuff is going to be out there in some way if you have a website. And so be considerate of that makes you vulnerable to certain things. Questions on that?
Min, could I ask you and Finus both a question? This sort of risk of being out in the public domain and this risk of being, available through email and social media.
Mm-hmm.
You had sort of bad experiences with that, and if so, what have you done to end it?
Finus, do you want to start?
For social, can you repeat the question again?
So maybe you just want to start. So the question,
sure.
Have you had any, so the point is, like, when your story is out and when you are in the public, you're become accessible, and people may try and contact you through LinkedIn or through Facebook, or they may find your email address or even your cell phone number. So my question is, have you had experiences with people trying to contact you? Have they been positive? Have they been negative? And if they've been negative, what have you done to sort of shut that down, to stop it?
Sure, I'll go, Finesse, and then you can think. So I've had that experiences, and there's definitely been negative ones. So a lot of this involves learning a little bit more about technology and how to protect yourself. So I don't put like my personal home address in places, right? But negative contact has usually been individuals who want to tell me something is wrong. And I think with what I said, or they're upset about me doing this work, or they think I'm lying about my story. And I would say, usually I don't engage. It's really a waste of my time. There are plenty of other people to connect with. So for the most part, I just ignore them. Now, if they're really just persistent about it, then I might say a very firm email or follow up in whatever method that I feel the most safe in, and say something to respond to what they said in a way that tries to end contact. I haven't had any, life threats or physical threats or anything like that. Just more people wanting to be nasty. And I think the worst one, to be honest, was a contact from a relative that I didn't want contact with. And I just had to use my intuition, and I asked them point blank. I said, they were disguising as somebody else, and I said, are you a relative of mine? And if so, I don't want to have contact with you. And so calling people out on that for me has been useful. What was I going to say? Using your intuition about people. And remembering, I think it's a lot to do internally about remembering your own self-worth, and that you do not have people don't have entitlements to your time, and you do not have to respond to anyone that you don't want to. And if it gets really bad, I would not hesitate to report it to the police if it was like a violent threat.
And Finus, have you had positive feedback, negative feedback? Have you gotten feedback through social media?
I had it, I mean, positive and like also, I mean, negative, that like, oh, this is not happening, those kind of thing, feedback. And then I have positive feedback. Then I have like weird feedback, like it's a little bit what is cheap. I mean, just said, I had interviews like a social media reporter, and this reporter, after done with the interview, and this reporter keep on contact me, need more information. Then I end up like, oh, this is so annoying. I just carried off. I couldn't respond because I give her whatever she wanted. I said, I think I give you enough information that you wanted. If you need more information, you can search it maybe online, you find the answer.
So we actually have a question from outside. I think Eric has asked, how do you manage the massive influx of requests and engagements that come in after you do a presentation? Those, Eric says, come both in person and they come virtually. So how are you balancing and managing your time? So Min, do you want to start?
Sure. So I would say start with the people that you feel most drawn to. There can be a feeling of, oh my gosh, I have to respond to all of them. And maybe at the beginning you will want to just develop your networks, but they don't always pan out. So start with the ones that are clearly very interested. Like they give you a date of an event or something. So the ones that seem most likely to work and the ones that I feel excited about, and then don't promise anything until you get full details and you look at your schedule. I also manage my time by, I try not to agree to anything immediately after an event because I might be super emotional or I might be on a high, not literally, but like happy about how well that went. But just take some space and time. Go back to your list of, these are the types of engagements that work for me. Look at where do you want to go next. Maybe you've never done a speaking engagement or a training or curriculum for this type of work, but you really want to get in that area. And that's going to take you 3 months. So therefore, you're going to have to say no to these other pieces. So think strategically also about the skills and areas that you want to grow in.
Finance, do you want to add anything?
No.
There's another question that came in, and Finance, why don't you start with an answer first this time. So how do you handle other survivors who may come from a different perspective or framework that you don't represent, or work as abolitionists on decriminalization and other regulation? How do we support other survivors working within a larger framework to combat this issue? For example, having other survivors confront you on your presentation that may not match their framework. So, Finance, have you ever had the experience that another survivor has disagreed with you, or so? How do you work within the movement where we all understand not everyone agrees?
So, I mean, like being in anti-trafficking movement, being a leader, you don't have to agree with everyone. We have disagreement, but you always have a way to work out. Yeah, there's no right or wrong. Yeah, you always find a way.
Go ahead, Finance.
I can give them my input, or how whatever suggestion I have, and I'm gonna let them also give their suggestions, and we're gonna put all on the table. So there's no win or lose. Yeah.
First and foremost, I usually say, I am interested in working with people who want to collaborate on things that we agree on, and only under a sort of guidelines about mutual respect and collaboration. So that has to do with anybody, whether or not we agree or disagree on certain topics. So I say, if you want to work with me, I've got some guidelines about how you work with me. And in terms of supporting survivors who have different perspectives, I think it's saying there's a way that we can work together on issues or work against each other. And there are definitely some fundamental positions where it's hard to work together. But I think that if we work against each other, we're both going to be not fighting the larger issues. So what are the things that we can work together on? And anything that we disagree on, we won't bring to this particular collaboration. We'll keep those separate. I also say to people, I don't want anyone denying my experience, so I don't want to deny your experience. Or, hey, I don't like having what I'm hearing you say is that my experience is not true, and I don't really appreciate that. I don't want to tell you your experience is not true. So how do we actually listen to each other and treat each other the way that we want the other to treat us? So for me, it's about, look, no one has the answer. There are different ways of going about it. And can we agree to talk about the ways that we might be doing things that piss the other group off? Let's just actually have a conversation about it and work to not become the people that we don't that we're trying to fight against in terms of being nasty and mean. So, you know, for example, the Survivor Alliance, we make sure to include people on different parts of the spectrum, but so long as you're willing to share in a respectful manner with each other.
So it sounds like both of you are really emphasizing the importance of communication within the survivor movement and the importance of sort of keeping an open line of communication in the survivor movement. So Min, I wonder, could you talk a little bit about the Survivors Alliance and how that works? And then Finus, if you can talk about the National Survivor Network and other US specific networks that allow survivors to stay in touch with one another, I think that would be helpful for people who aren't already involved in those networks. So Min, do you want to start with the Survivor Alliance?
Sure. So the Survivor Alliance is an NGO, and we unite and empower survivors of slavery and human trafficking around the world. We don't care if you hate that term or those terms. We just want you to have gone through something that fits those definitions. And we are focused on connecting you through online and digital means, as well as supporting you to develop networks in your own area, and leadership development and capacity building. So helping put on workshops like these, connecting you to other survivors that might have experience. And we're really focused on making sure survivor voices are included in all aspects of the movement. So making sure that you get connected to training, leadership, consulting opportunities. And we are hoping to have a conference in April in the UK. But if you join now, it's free. We do our best to support you directly and point you to resources. For example, we've got a list of like survivor books that maybe you're interested in, or conferences, and have kind of a wide network of NGOs doing this work. So that's a little bit about us.
And Finus, do you want to talk about some of the networks that you're involved in?
Well, I'm involved with the Survivor Alliance. I'm a board member of Survivor Alliance, but also I'm a member of NSA, National Survivor Network. It was founded in 2012, but I've been a member since 2013. NSN is a private for survivors. You can apply if you are like a survivor. It doesn't matter what kind of gender, nationality, what kind of walk of life you're coming from. You can apply this application, you can apply, become a member. It's the goal for National Survivor Network. It's like, first of all, we support each other, right, as a survivor. That's the goal. And also, we work very close to anti-trafficking organization. When it comes to policy, those kind of things, find a solution to end human trafficking. So we do a lot of things. And also, like, we have consultant, but like sometimes when people trying to find somebody to speak, they cannot reach out to anything. So if you have like the knowledge that they are looking for, you can be able to connect it. If you are open to speak, if you are ready to speak, first of all, you have to get to the point that where you can speak. You are healed and speak, not somebody to force you to do that. Then when you reach out that point, you can able to be connected to other people who be maybe want a consultant to present. And you also, there's like a training, but like, like coaching. I never went through that, but there is some coaching that you can have, like somebody training you like that. But myself personally, I never done that, but you can have able to do that also, coaching. So yeah, if you have survivors on the call, they would like to join National Survivor Network, just hit me up. My email is gonna be at the bottom of the end of our presentation. You can reach out to me and I can be.
Go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So there's our contact.
Are there other questions? I can't see the chat box, but are there any other questions that people have? We have one person on the phone who's an expert on tax. So Dolores, I would love to talk to you about the next webinar, which is going to specifically focus on tax. But are there any other questions specific for Min or Finus about consulting?
I'll just address one I see from Sarah Dolan about what if you have a better relationship with a survivor. I think it's just important to say every survivor is individual, and you might not get along, and we recommend every person needs to earn each other's trust, right? And so I always recommend communication as much as possible, but try and be as respectful and civil as possible. And you don't have to work with them. There's plenty of other people to work with. But I always suggest that you communicate what's bad and what's not working for you, and see if that person is willing to respond.
So I think we just have about 2 minutes left. So I'm going to ask each of you to give one last word, one piece of advice. So finalists, do you have one sort of golden nugget piece of advice that you think people should walk away from the seminar with if they'd like to be consultants?
Means that.
Min, you start.
Yeah, my piece of advice is to focus on the work. And what that means is if there's something you really want to see changed in, whether it's services or prevention or whatever it is, or maybe it has nothing to do with anti-trafficking but is related, like you want more access to education for young Black LGBT youth, like focus on that, and then everything else, direct everything that you do around that focus. That will keep you inspired and help you stay focused and work through the difficult times.
Great. Finance?
Well, I just want to my ways. What did you say again?
What's your one piece of advice that you have for people who want to be consultants?
Oh, my advice for people who want to be consultant, first of all, I wanted to let you know that it's not easy. There will be like ups and downs. But if you are called to do this, don't give up.
That's, I think, a really helpful note to end on. I think that's a great place to stop. So thank you to everyone who participated. Thank you to Melinda for handling all of the excellent navigation behind the scenes. And we look forward to seeing all of you at the next webinar, which will focus on taxation issues on November the 13th. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you
For having us.